Matthew 21:14. And the blind and lame came to him. That the authority which Christ had claimed for himself out of the usual course might not be suspected of rashness, he supported it by miracles. He therefore cured the blind and lame in the temple, in order to proclaim that the rights and honor of Messiah truly belonged to him, for by these marks the prophets describe him. Hence we again perceive what I hinted a little ago, that it is not every one of the people who is called to imitate this action of Christ lest he inconsiderately raise himself to the throne of the Messiah. We ought indeed to believe that the lame and blind, who were cured, were witnesses of the divine power of Christ, as if God, by his voice from heaven, approved what had been proclaimed by the multitude. 15. When the chief priests and scribes saw, Luke relates that the Pharisees began to grumble, while he was still on the road. It was the disciples that were then crying out, the others wished to have them silenced. Christ replied, that it was in vain for them to make opposition, because God would rather make the stones cry out than permit the reign of his Son to be forgotten. It is probable that, as the crying out was not diminished, and as even the children now joined in it, the scribes and priests were roused to still fiercer indignation, and then commenced a new attack on Christ. They appear indirectly to reproach him by alleging that he is desirous to obtain the praises of children. But we must observe whence their displeasure arose. That it was connected with ungodly malice and outrageous contempt of God is evident from the fact that his miracles gave them not less uneasiness than the shouts of applause. But I now inquire about some more special reason. What was it that chiefly vexed them? Now we know how eagerly they contended for their authority, for the object to which their zeal carried them was, that the tyranny, which they had once claimed, might continue to be enjoyed by them, and it was no slight diminution of their power, if the people were at liberty to bestow on Christ the title of King. Even in trifling matters they wished their decisions to be regarded as oracles, so that it might not be permitted to approve or reject anything but according to their pleasure. They therefore reckon it to be foolish and unreasonable, that the people should confer the title of Messiah on one whom they do not treat with any respect. And certainly, if they had done their duty, it would have been proper for them to direct the whole people, and to go before them as their leaders. For the priests had been appointed, that from their lips all might seek the knowledge of the law, and, in short, that they might be the messengers and interpreters of the God of armies, Malachi 2-7, but as they had basely extinguished the light of truth, Christ appropriately replies, that they gain nothing by endeavoring to suppress the doctrine of salvation, for it will rather break out from the stones. There is likewise an implied admission, for Christ does not deny that it is an unnatural order for the uneducated multitude and children to be the first to magnify with their voice the coming of the Messiah, but as the truth is wickedly suppressed by those who ought to have been its lawful witnesses, it is not wonderful if God raise up others, and, to their shame, make choice of children. Hence we derive no slight consolation, for though wicked men leave no stone unturned for concealing the reign of Christ, we learn from this passage that their efforts are in vain. They hope that, when some of the multitude, that is carrying forward the kingdom of Christ, shall have been put to death, and others shall be silenced by fear, they will gain their object. But God will disappoint them, for he will sooner give mouths and tongues to stones than allow the kingdom of his Son to be without witnesses. 18. And returning in the morning, between that solemn entrance of Christ, of which we have spoken, and the day of the Passover, he had passed the night in Bethany, and during the day he appeared in the temple for the purpose of teaching. Matthew and Mark relate what happened during that interval, that Christ, when coming into the city, was hungry, approached a fig tree, and, having found nothing on it but leaves, cursed it, and that the tree, which had been cursed by his voice, immediately withered. I take for granted that Christ did not pretend hunger, but was actually hungry, for we know that he voluntarily became subject to the infirmities of the flesh, though by nature he was free and exempt from them. But here lies the difficulty. How was he mistaken in seeking fruit on a tree that had none, more especially, when the season of fruit had not yet arrived? And again, Why was he so fiercely enraged against a harmless tree? But there would be no absurdity in saying that as man, he did not know the kind of tree, though it is possible that he approached it on purpose, with full knowledge of the result. Certainly it was not the fury of passion that led him to curse the tree, for that would not only have been an unjust, but even a childish and ridiculous revenge, but as hunger was troublesome to him according to the feeling of the flesh, he determined to overcome it by an opposite affection, that is, by a desire to promote the glory of the Father, as he elsewhere says, "My meat is to do the will of my Father," John 4:34. For at that time he was contending both with fatigue and with hunger. I am the more inclined to this conjecture, because hunger gave him an opportunity of performing a miracle and of teaching his disciples. So when he was pressed by hunger, and there was no food at hand, he finds a repast in another way, that is, by promoting the glory of God. He intended, however, to present in this tree an outward sign of the end which awaits hypocrites, and at the same time to expose the emptiness and folly of their ostentation.